think it's quite sad that you now want to come back to your homeland that you've called racist. I think it's quite sad, young man, that you didn't understand the depths of the attacks you put on the royal family.
Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Hypocrisy, strike again in a not-so-surprising retreat.
You sold your soul, and the only way you made your money is to slag off the very institution you now want to clasp hold of. I wouldn't have you in this country, but I'm sure you'll be on the way back.
6 years after they left the country, saying their lives were in danger.
And Meghan said she never wanted to come back. Do you remember that?
Never wanted to come back.
Told Omid Scobie at that last Buckingham Palace reception, I don't think I'll ever return. No, she did, but only really for the funeral of and the Jubilee, the two sort of forced returns.
They left Britain branding it racist, dangerous, and unbearable. They said their lives were at risk. They boarded that famous freedom flight believing they could build a new existence thousands of miles away, far from the institution they had spent years surrounded by. And then, after everything they said, everything they revealed, and everything they promised, they came back. But this time, the reception was not the triumphant homecoming anyone expected. It was something far more brutal. The question suddenly became impossible to avoid. Why return to the country they once described as impossible to live in? And why now? The moment Harry and Meghan stepped onto British soil, the atmosphere reportedly turned viciously cold. There was no glorious reunion, no overwhelming wave of affection, no cinematic royal homecoming. Instead, claims circulated of crowds booing loudly and relentlessly. Harry appeared shaken, while Meghan's carefully controlled public smile seemed to disappear. For years, every appearance had been managed, every expression photographed, every controversy followed by another explanation. But suddenly there was nowhere for the performance to hide. The crowd itself became the story, and that is where this entire mystery begins. Because a return like this does not happen in isolation. It happens after years of accusations, interviews, documentaries, lawsuits, commercial deals, public battles, and increasingly bitter arguments about what the royal family represents. So when the reception reportedly turned hostile, supporters saw it as proof that the British public had not forgotten anything. Critics saw something even more dramatic, a public verdict arriving before the palace could control the narrative. Thousands of people expressing their anger was suddenly transformed into something bigger than one unpleasant reception. Every grievance that had accumulated over the years seemed to collide in one moment. But then came the detail that made the story even stranger. While Britain was reportedly reacting with hostility, voices across America were celebrating the return as well. One viral comment supposedly captured that bizarre split perfectly. America was practically asking Britain to keep booing. Two countries, two continents, and supposedly one shared reaction. But underneath the noise was a much more uncomfortable question. Was this really a homecoming, or was it a strategic retreat disguised as a family decision? Because the official explanation sounded almost impossibly simple. The children needed British education. Archie and Lied would supposedly benefit from British schools, British values, and a British upbringing. On paper, it sounds perfectly reasonable. Parents move countries for education every day, but timing is everything, and this timing raised eyebrows. Archie had already spent years being educated in California. There had been no emergency requiring an immediate British move while the family was signing lucrative entertainment agreements and presenting their Montecito lifestyle as their new permanent reality. So why suddenly was Britain essential? And this is where the financial theory entered the conversation. The Netflix relationship had reportedly deteriorated. The Spotify deal was gone. Commercial projects that once appeared unstoppable no longer carried the same momentum. Meghan's lifestyle brand had generated enormous publicity, yet questions about its commercial performance continued to follow it. Even the Montecito mansion, once portrayed as the family's forever home, was reportedly being discussed in connection with a private sale. One failed project can happen to anyone. Two can happen. But when several streams of income begin disappearing at once, suddenly every decision starts looking different. Then comes the bill that is impossible to ignore: security. Harry and Meghan have faced enormous private security expenses since stepping away from royal duties, with figures of around $3 million annually being circulated in commentary surrounding their situation. That kind of expenditure changes everything. A luxury mansion is expensive, international travel is expensive, lawyers are expensive, security is brutally expensive. And when the money coming in becomes less predictable, predictable, the money going out becomes terrifyingly important. That is why critics began asking the question the palace could not simply laugh away. If Britain was once the place they had escaped from, could financial pressure have become one of the reasons they needed it again? There was another complication waiting in the background. Harry had publicly discussed past drug use in his memoir, including cocaine, marijuana, and magic mushrooms. That disclosure became especially controversial because American immigration applications contained questions concerning drug use. Critics subsequently questioned whether what had been publicly admitted could create complications with the information supplied on immigration documents. The money question was only the beginning, because sitting underneath it was an even darker possibility. Harry and Meghan were not simply returning to Britain. Critics were asking whether they were returning because remaining in America had become increasingly difficult. Their charity affairs had attracted scrutiny, their legal battles had become expensive, and questions surrounding Archewell Foundation and Centerball had added another layer of controversy. Then came the extraordinary RICO allegations circulating online, dragging Harry and Meghan into a much wider web of names and accusations. Those claims remain allegations, not established facts, but their existence became another source of speculation around a family already surrounded by legal and financial questions. And that is exactly why the timing of the British return became so fascinating. A family does not normally uproot itself, enroll children into new schools, arrange housing, and coordinate an international media announcement without months of preparation. Yet the palace narrative suggested King Charles did not know about the return until immediately before it became public. That explanation immediately invited suspicion, because look at what had to happen behind closed doors. Schools had to be contacted, applications had to be completed, housing had to be secured, security arrangements had to be considered, lawyers and advisors had to be involved, and somehow multiple newspapers received the story under embargo and released it at precisely the same moment. That was not an accidental leak. It was a carefully constructed media operation. Someone had planned it, someone had coordinated it, and someone had decided exactly when the world would learn that Harry and Meghan were coming back. Then another bombshell entered the picture. Reports that Meghan had previously discussed the possibility of a post-divorce autobiography while the marriage was still intact. The allegation was explosive because it suggested that even before the British return, another narrative could already have been waiting in the wings. If that book ever materialized, every awkward family encounter, every disagreement, every perceived slight, and every uncomfortable moment in Britain could potentially become material. Suddenly, the return itself could become the opening chapter of another public battle. And then there was Earl Spencer. Almost simultaneously, Diana's brother announced a book promising to tell Diana's story from her own perspective. The timing was almost too perfect for conspiracy-minded observers to ignore. Diana's legacy remains one of the most powerful emotional weapons surrounding the royal family, and Harry's identity has always been deeply connected to being her son. Put Diana's brother Harry, Meghan, and Archewell Productions anywhere near the same future project, and speculation practically writes itself. But perhaps the most significant palace development involved Sir Clive Alderton. Reports claim that the senior royal aide had resigned after disagreeing with the decision surrounding Harry and Meghan. If true, that was not a minor disagreement. It represented a serious internal fracture over the direction of the monarchy itself. One side could see reconciliation as healing, another could see it as surrender. And that brings the story directly to Charles. His health crisis reportedly changed his outlook profoundly. The belief that he had been given another opportunity to serve created a powerful personal motivation. Repair the family before his reign ends. But what Charles sees as healing, William may see as betrayal. William has spent years protecting the institution, standing beside Catherine, and absorbing the consequences of royal conflict. He is unlikely to forget the attacks simply because the family has suddenly decided that reconciliation photographs would look better. Catherine's position makes that tension even more explosive. After everything she has endured, the prospect of Harry and Meghan returning to the royal orbit could create enormous pressure inside the family. And William's choice of lawyers associated with Diana was interpreted by critics as a message he was preparing to protect himself rather than simply play the obedient son. Then come the children. Archie and Lilibet would now be entering an environment where privacy becomes much harder to control. British schools mean teachers, parents, classmates, ordinary conversations, and an entirely different level of public visibility. That raises another uncomfortable question. Is this genuinely about education, or is there a deeper reason for establishing the children physically in Britain. If the marriage ever collapses, geography could suddenly become crucial, and that is where Charles may have made his greatest gamble. He appears determined to repair what he believes can still be repaired. But William may be calculating something completely different, because while Charles is trying to heal the wound, William may be preparing for what happens if the wound never closes. The monarchy survived generations because personal feelings were always supposed to come second to the institution. Now that principle is being tested again. And if Charles has chosen Harry and Meghan's return as his final attempt at family reconciliation, the question is no longer whether William will forgive. The question is what William does when he decides he has heard enough.